2026 Early Connections Conference, Action, presented by the Van Slaan Foundation. The title of this presentation is Parent Voices, Insights and Inspiration.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you guys have had a good day so far at the conference. I'm Emily Bartlett. I'm one of the social workers for the Infant-Toddler Program at Perkins. So with us, we have some parents, so they're going to do some introductions, and then we're going to go into questions. We're going to cover a few topics. They're going to be the beginning of the journey, support and growth, building connections, navigating challenges, navigating relationships, advice and reflection, and then if time allows, we'll open up for a Q&A. So I first want to introduce Nicole.
All right, here we go. Hello, I'm Nicole. This is my daughter, Shelby. She is diagnosed with extreme cuteness and a fantastic sense of humor and great taste in music. She is 12 years old. She's at Perkins now. So we went to the infant toddler program, like 9 years ago, and it was one of the best experiences ever, especially because her siblings could go. And that was huge for me as a mom in the middle of like trauma and chaos, and it really helped us bond as a young family.
Hi, I'm CJ, and Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa.
This is our son, Charlie. He is 5 now. We got into the infant toddler program at what, 6 months, 4 months. And it was absolutely transformative. And, he grew so much during that time. When we first got in, he couldn't sit up. He couldn't even track lights or anything. But by the end of the program, he was, he recognized Miss Susan, Miss Betsy, and he could request songs. And yeah, it was a really, really good experience for us.
Hey everyone, I'm Megan. My son Henry is 4.5. He'll be 5 this summer. He has FOXG1 syndrome, so like so many people from in the infant toddler group, a rare genetic syndrome that I had never heard of until he was born. So this is a picture of Henry on his first day of school this year at preschool. He goes to a local collaborative school, and we started at Perkins when he was 8 months old. And then we went through and graduated almost 2 years ago. But amazing experience. We have some lifelong friends that we met through the program and just excited to be back.
Thank you, guys. So now we're going to start with the beginning of the journey. So does anyone want to share a little bit about how your family first became connected with Perkins in the infant toddler program?
I have the mic, so I can start. I will pass it over shortly. But so we were first connected to Perkins. It was sort of during COVID, post-COVID. Henry was about 8 months old. We were recommended by our early intervention team. I knew nothing about CVI or being blind. I think disability in general was new to us. And I was sharing with Alyssa and CJ earlier. At the beginning, I feel like this is a safe space. I really did not like coming here. It was almost an hour commute. I'm not big on talking about my feelings. I was like, great, I need to sit in this room for an hour and talk about my feelings and probably cry. And then I think a few months into it, it was the highlight of our week and like certainly the highlight of Henry's week. So I have a good friend that I met in the program, and we would always commiserate of how we, we're just lugging here and it took so long to get here. And then by the end, we like couldn't wait and we're so sad and so tearful to have to leave the program and to age out.
We started at 4 months old. Charlie was diagnosed legally blind, and we got introduced from Mass Commission of the Blind and EI. And as soon as they asked us to join, we did. It was during COVID, so it was all online. And I, unlike Megan, loved it because I did not have the support from friends and some family members that didn't really understand Charlie's diagnosis and what being blind was. So being connected with people that really did understand was really helpful for me. It was a safe space for me to cry it out and shoot some jokes and cry together. You know what I mean? So for me, it was a really amazing situation. CJ?
So being a dad in one of those groups was really interesting because when I started, there really were no dads to speak of. There were guest speakers whose kids went through Perkins, and they were very inspirational for me. But also getting a dad's perspective seemed really helpful for some of the other dads who were in there. And I was really scared in the beginning because I was like, well, these people know way more than me about everything, and why would my perspective ever be useful? But then, just learning more and connecting more it got me through that initial fear. Like, you were saying, am I going to just talk about my feelings? Are these people going to care? But then you realize that it is a real community.
How many are you familiar with what the infant toddler program looks like and what happens? Okay, so basically families get together in the morning, we start with a morning song, and then the child who qualifies for the program and the siblings, they hang out, play. The kids each get like a one-on-one, and then the parents go off with a social worker, which is why we're talking about crying and about our feelings and getting support. So that's how this all works. We were connected with the former school psychologist here, and that's how we got brought into the infant toddler program. And I will kind of talk about this bottom question here. It was very lonely. Oh, and how many people are parents here? Okay. It's super lonely. It's very confusing. It's awful. I mean, it's really, really hard. And infant toddler was the first place that I felt like comfortable, that people understood everything that I was going through. And it was the first time I felt hope for my daughter and her diagnosis, which was really huge because I just didn't know what to expect. And it was just crucial to have the group of families there. We actually still email and send Christmas cards with my twins, like their one-on-one person. It was awesome.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to share some of those emotions that you had when you first learned about your child's diagnosis or needs? And what was the most helpful in those early weeks or months?
Yeah, so we didn't get an official diagnosis for a while. We were working on when he was born, he couldn't track anything. He had progressively apparent low muscle tone. And then we ended up getting an ultrasound in the hospital before we were affiliated with Children's. And we saw on one of the notes that he had a molar tooth malformation that was found on the ultrasound of his head. And then you learn something like that and you start Googling everything, and then you're like, oh, okay, everything is bad. So the initial fear is you look at all the symptoms and you see the different prognosis, and one of the first thoughts I had was, well, how long do we even have with him? So by the time we got an actual diagnosis, it was more of a good place to find direction and see, what can we do and what should we be doing, what's helpful. And again, the fear gets replaced with direction.
Hope.
Yeah, hope.
So we knew prenatally that something was wrong with Henry. We had a diagnosis in the NICU. I would say I don't like feelings, so I don't like crying on stage either, but no. So I think, so kind of the opposite. We had a diagnosis of this random genetic thing we had never heard of when we were in the NICU. And similar, like you hear, everything is bad, it's terrible, like your life has changed forever. And I remember asking the neurologist, which I don't know if some of you are parents, I'm sure you've met with neurologists before. I remember saying, like, are there like, they had basically, genetics had told us he's one of like, I don't know, 200 people, 300 people in the world, which that number has grown over the past almost 5 years. I remember saying to the neurologist, like, what sort of support is there? Like, is there anyone else in this world that this is happening to? Or do we just have like remarkably terrible luck that it's just us? We're the only people in this position. And they had said, you know, like, you'll find your people, whether that's through the Federation of Children with Special Needs or I don't even remember what other group they referred us to. And we're like, okay, that feels very like pie in the sky. We really have to do the work. So I think once we found the infant toddler group, once I got over the commute and I got over having to talk about my feelings in the group, it was just such an incredible and supportive community. And I think something that I learned that was one of my biggest takeaways from the group was that these children and these families that we met, like they didn't have to have the same diagnosis as Henry. And some of them presented similar to Henry. Some of them presented very differently. I always affectionately say that he has the whole 9 yards. So Henry has a wheelchair, a trach, uses a ventilator at night. He has an AAC device, CVI, like whole 9 yards. So just because there weren't any kids that looked exactly like Henry doesn't mean that, you know, I couldn't find community in those parents, or he couldn't find, you know, lifelong friends. We saw his friend Elijah a few weeks ago. So I think that was really eye-opening for me, was that it doesn't have to be these people with this exact diagnosis in order to like have the support and the understanding that we found here.
Thank you, guys. We're going to move on to support and growth. So how did your child grow and change during the time in the infant toddler program, and what types of support made the biggest difference to your family?
Sure. I think just, again, that feeling of hope for Shelby, like actually being able to see her as a little girl and a child, as opposed to this constant stream of doctor's appointments that we had to go to like all the time, but you could go and watch her. One day they brought in like the reptiles and like she touched something nasty. I don't know, remember what it was, but like, oh, she can actually, again, she can do these things and enjoy it. Her one-on-one was Miss Barber, and she was amazing. And I remember coming back one day from the parent session, they had done an art project. So even just like that thought that like Shelby can do these things with support, and Miss Barber was like, oh, she put those there. I was like, oh, really? Like she put them there? And she said, yes, she intentionally put them there. And I think that was support for me too, again, to just say, to have that coupled with what we were working through with the social worker really made it a cohesive program for us.
You want me to read mine?
I got some stuff. Yeah, I'm gonna also I'm also gonna echo what Megan was saying, that the emotional support that we got just from seeing the wide range of kids with disabilities and seeing, you know, what a milestone even really looks like. It kind of redefined what a milestone was. You know, just touching a lizard and being able to have them experience that is pretty crazy. The biggest support that I felt was the educational side of it. Specifically with the infant toddler program, all of the guest speakers that they would have on were so helpful in such a profound way. Things that questions you didn't know that you had. and answers that were really useful. And, learning about other kids' disabilities and how their parents handle them and how they help them interact with the world was inspiring. So the educational aspect of it for me was really important too.
I do have a part. Oh my gosh. For when Charlie started at the program, he could barely track from left to midline. And watching that like just go and go and go after each session and watching Betsy and Miss Susan and all these people just like interact with him and then him interact back with them was so cool to watch in like real time. And I'm like, oh my God, he's making eye contact. When you think your son is never going to see your face, like that is a really heavy feeling. And then like watching the growth of that, it's powerful. You know what I mean? So from 4 months old to being told your son can't see, he don't know what he's going to see, and CVI is so different for each kid. You don't know what to expect. So when it goes from nothing to, oh, I see a light across the room, or I see a cup in a ball pit, and those are huge things for me. Like CJ said, milestones, those are our milestones. Not typical milestones that, oh, he's walking, oh, he's talking, he's saying mama, he's saying dada. He's 5 and he still doesn't. But you know what he does? He'll give you a mean eye roll. He will do that. And he'll look right into your eyes while he does it. So that's my from infant toddler program to 5.
I would echo both what all of you say. I think when Henry so we were around 8 months old when we came. Henry had severe agitation. We had some medication situations with weaning and GI discomfort, and we kind of like, you never knew what you were going to get with Henry at the beginning when he was little. Like sometimes he would have a great day, sometimes he wouldn't. And I think as we settled into a better place, as he got a little bit older and bigger, I think we really saw the joy that Perkins brought him. So Curious Creatures with the reptiles. I'm looking at Betsy because I know she remembers. It was the spring. I think we started probably in like March or April, and then when we were getting ready to break for summer, they brought in the reptiles, and I have never seen Henry at that moment in time. I had never seen Henry as happy as he was when he was touching a hedgehog, and some. Yes, and the bunny. Yeah, loved anything for just absolutely big smile on his face. And he came here with his nurse, Caitlin. And Caitlin and I were like, we didn't know he was this happy. We didn't know he could smile this big. We didn't know that this was something that he really enjoyed. So then of course we like went all in on the hedgehog. He has like all these hedgehog like toys and clothes and all of that. And I think that was really the first time that we saw just the joy. And I think like seeing him as, I mean, he's by no means a typically developing child, but in some ways he's very much a typical kid. Like he has the sass. He likes the animals. He loved the fire truck. Like all of these programs that were put on, it really just made us feel like he was, just like his older brother, who's very close in age, that he was having these similar experiences, even though they looked different. I will say I also loved the Mother's Day gifts or the Father's Day gifts. And I think those little things that maybe don't feel like that much, the fact that Henry worked with his one-on-one Joanne, who we love dearly, and his nurse to put the sticker on the flower pot or to like paint a shamrock around St. Patrick's Day, just like gave us some sort of normalcy in this like crazy world that we live in and day out. The other piece I'll say with the education, I agree with you that that the speakers that they had come in like answered all these questions that I never knew I had. I didn't know needed to be on my radar. I just learned so much as a parent, and I think as a parent to a child with a disability, I really like grew my mindset and I think my skills that way. I also think the support around the IEP process was just like invaluable. I think the support from the parents, the support from the staff at Perkins, I remember coming in tears one day when our IEP meeting didn't go as planned, and I was 9 months pregnant, ready to pop, thinking like, where is Henry going to go to preschool? And I think just the support from the teachers and the one-on-ones and just the fellow parents was just so incredibly valuable. And I think I attribute, he right now is at a collaborative school that we love, and we hope that he stays there for life, or until 22. But I really attribute like his success there to everything that we were able to get from the infant toddler program.
Yeah, can you guys share a little bit more on building connections, how you connected with other families, maybe outside the infant toddler program or inside, what role they played in your journey, and any advice you'd give to other parents about starting that journey to connect with other people?
We started connections very early on because, as you can see, we are talkers. So we bonded with families immediately, and we still, 2 years graduated out of the infant toddler program, still see families. They're coming to Charlie's birthday parties. We're going to their events. Like, there's this one family that we go, and she has a diagnosis that's 1 in 1, maybe. I don't know. And we go to all of her events every year. She's always invited to every birthday party, and they show up, and she lives maybe 2 hours away. Like, it was just an incredible feeling. We met another family that, this is really loud, I'm sorry. We met another family that also had Joe Bear syndrome that Katie Teff connected with us. And she came over our house and they played. And like, I've never seen another Joe Bear kid in my life, let alone in my living room. So that was, we gave them a stander, and we offered her old things that helped Charlie stand, and now she may be using that, and that's just like a cool connection that for a lifetime feels like it will always be there. And we check in with each other every week, and I text her when I'm having a low day and when she's having a low day about her child's progress. We're just connecting on that level, and that is a feeling that feels so good for people that, don't have those connections with people that are close to them. And Perkins Infant Toddler Group did that for us. And even though we weren't even in the group at the same time, and that's crazy too, is like 3 years apart, and now this girl's in my living room, and it's just so sweet to see.
I'll just handle the last part of this, the advice for getting the connections. There's lots of opportunities that are presented to you as you go through these different things, whether it's through EI or through Perkins or whatever it is. And you got to jump on those connections. You got to do it. And with like anything, it's tough at first, just like the infant toddler program, it's intimidating at first, but the more you do it, the more normal it gets. And then it just becomes your regular life. And then more opportunities will present themselves to you as a result of doing those things. Somebody will say, hey, I'm interested in you to come to this group. Can you talk over here? And then you meet more people, and then you just got to do it. You got to push through.
One of Massachusetts has way too many state agencies for any one parent to navigate, and it's not fun. But somehow we were enrolled in a palliative care program, and so we have Hope Health. They have been one of our, since leaving the infant toddler program, they have been one of our biggest sources of support. The social workers is great. I can ask her any type of question. They have family gatherings that we go to, and it's nice to know those families and to see them with their kids, and then have my other kids see their children with disabilities. So that for me has been one of the biggest support things. The state agencies, they are helpful, but they are impersonal. Sorry if anybody from those agencies in the room, they're helpful, but they're just not really personal. So if you are not connected with a palliative care program, I believe you could get in touch with like Mass Commission or maybe it was the DDS that we got in from, but it is a great program if you are not aware of that.
And I would say probably similar things to what's been said. We have a group chat that we started probably too late, but we have a group chat with people who were in the infant-toddler program at a certain time. And that's where we share wins, or we'll say, I love getting updates from some of the families that, someone had taken their first steps or says mama now, or whatever the win may be. So I think that's been really helpful. And I think I mentioned earlier, like just being open-minded to other types of people and knowing that it doesn't need to be the same diagnosis. However, remember earlier when I said that there were very few people with FOXG1 syndrome? We were actually introduced to another child with FOXG1 syndrome as well. So just like the power of connections, I think, is just so important. And it just, again, like reinforced you're not alone. There are other people, and everything, at least with his syndrome, is very much a spectrum. So one child presents differently than the other. But I think just keeping an open mind, and I think just like as hard as it is, kind of what CJ was saying, like just showing up, just doing it and staying connected. And we similarly stay connected with families, go to birthday parties, and Nicole, I liked something that you said about your other children seeing other kids with disabilities. I think that has been so wonderful for me to see as well. My older son is a little less than 2 years older than Henry, and I mean, they get along great. And Liam thinks it's so cool that Henry has these friends, and he calls him like his 5-year-old friend Elijah. That's Henry's friend who came over the other day. And my older son, who's typically developing, sees these kids as just his peers and just his little brother's friends. So I think I had something else to say, but I think I'll cut myself off. So yeah, just be open-minded and just show up and continue to put in the work to build that network.
What was one of the biggest challenges your family faced? How did you work through it? And how did you also take care of yourself as individuals and parents during that time?
Our biggest challenge from the beginning was kind of extended family, not really understanding what it is to have a blind family member and or diagnosis of a disability. A lot of our family kind of just assumed like, no, he'll get better. There's a magic fix for him. And I'm like, there isn't. So we really struggled in the beginning with that. And we really just wanted people to see him for who he was and accept him for who he was. And now at 5, they say, oh, okay, he can't walk. He is legally blind. But it took a while. And there isn't a magic fix. So that was a tough start for us. But getting through that, we just gave more knowledge. Knowledge was power for us. Explaining what his diagnosis is, what he can see, what he can't see, making the world available for him in any way we could to prove to other people, hey, he's still capable, even though he might be a little bit different than what you're expecting. So that was a challenge for us, but we worked through it with education.
There are too many to list. I will say surgery after surgery after surgery after surgery. That is a constant challenge. I just don't want to have to be on. I just don't want to have to go to a supermarket and see people stare at us and be like, it's okay to say hi. Stuff like that is just a huge challenge, but I also know that I need to do that because I want other people to not be scared of my daughter or people with disabilities. And the extended family thing is huge. Man, it is not fun to have people understand why you can't do certain things or you can. And as far as taking care of myself, my personality does not allow for that. However, I've just started last year, I've committed to seeing live music once a month. So after 5 years, oh no, not 5 years, after like 13 years, because my twins are 13, that is finally the one thing I'm starting to do, is see live music once again and read books.
I would echo the challenge upon challenge. I think when I think back, I mean, we've been fortunate that we haven't had many surgeries. We've had a few hospitalizations, actually not quite as many as one might expect with someone with a trach and respiratory concerns. So I would say that I shared the story earlier. We had a really challenging transition to from early intervention into an IEP. And I went in, I was a little naive, right? So I had been in Perkins since Henry was 8 months old. I thought I know everything I possibly could know about the process, how I need to be prepared, what I need to say in the evaluations, what I don't need to say, I felt extremely over prepared and then was completely blindsided by our district. And I think that was one of the times where I think I mentioned I was very pregnant with our third child. I was about to give birth, and the school district was just, proposing some wildly inappropriate things. And I think, like bringing it back to Perkins, I think that was a time I remember coming in here. I think I cried to multiple staff members, and just the support and knowing that, I wasn't crazy for thinking that he deserved something else or that he needed something else. And, having them just like be there to emotionally support, I think was just tremendously valuable. And spoiler, I think I mentioned earlier, he's at a collaborative school that we love. So it all ended up working out. But I think in that moment, you work so much to prepare and do everything you can. And then, as I think we all probably in this room know too well, like life throws you a curveball and there's just nothing that you can really do about it. And I think in terms of taking care of yourself, I try. I have 3 young boys. I try as hard as I can to, make some time for myself. I think it ebbs and flows, right? I also work full time, and it's every day is a puzzle and a challenge. But I think just trying to have some open and honest communication with my husband or other supports around me and saying like, hey, I just like need a break. I need to go into the other room for a little bit, or, I need a night off. Or if we, Henry has one-to-one nursing. So some nights if we don't have nursing, just saying like, I need a night off tonight. Can you kind of tap in? And I'm fortunate enough that my husband's wonderful and super supportive, but I think just like being able to over communicate those needs has been really helpful.
Thank you for that segue, Megan. But what are some ways that you and your partner supported and currently support each other through the early stages of your child's diagnosis in the program? And how has your relationship grown or changed along this journey?
Sure, I can take. Yeah, that's a great segue. It's almost as if I had if I knew what the questions were. So I would say, like I said, my husband's wonderful. Like, of course, he drives me crazy, yes, but we have always been very much over communicators, and he is like laser focused on Henry and the other boys. So I think starting from that foundation, I just recognize how fortunate I am. I think something that has just worked for us is just really trying our best to be a united front from the beginning. So I think something that we had decided early on, back in those diagnosis days of like, everything's terrible, your life is going to be awful forever, and like nothing's ever going to be the same. I think once the fog kind of cleared a little bit, we made a decision that, Henry has a disability and that's part of him, but that's not all of him. It's a large part of him, but he also, has the sass, likes other things that other 4-year-old boys like. And not only is a disability part of Henry, but Henry's disability like does not define our family, does not define our relationship. Like it is absolutely a very large and important part of our family and our relationship. But Dan and I made a conscious decision and conscious effort to not let it infiltrate and dictate absolutely everything. So I think when when times have been tough, we've kind of gone back to that and revisited that. I think our relationship has certainly changed, right? I mean, caring for a child with a disability is so incredibly tough. And I think while it's changed, I think we see each other with like just in a different light. I think we've been through, the darkest, the lowest of the lows. We're certainly not in the honeymoon stage anymore, 11 years in. And I think just having that like mutual respect and being very adamant that it's not you versus me. It's not I take him to the appointments, like, and while you're working or whatever, we try very hard not to have that resentment. Although, like, I'll be entirely honest, like sometimes there is a little bit of resentment on both sides, I imagine, right? Like, but just the commitment to each other and to our family, I think, has just helped us stay grounded.
I can't agree with Megan more. As you can see, we are up here together. So stronger together is what we've always really done with Charlie, and Charlie has always been our forward force. You know what I mean? So when we found out Charlie's diagnosis and disabilities, we went gung ho together, and I think that's the only way to get through it. Obviously, we've had some. It's your fault. It's my fault. It's blah 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 fault. Go sleep on the couch. We've both been there. He sleeps on the couch more than I do. But at the end of the day, we're gonna stay together and work together as a team for Charlie and what's best for him at the end of the day. And I'll always be there for you, and hopefully you'll be there for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I love you too. Megan, you said that going through something as traumatic as this is real. I mean, like trauma bonding, come on, but oh, sorry. But the respect that you have for the other person afterwards is kind of indescribable. I mean, you can't imagine going through this with somebody else or even on your own, because there's times when you fall apart and there's times when the other person falls apart, but there's always going to be somebody to ground you. And I think a big part of this is once the dust settled as well, then it's like, okay, it's time to get real, and look at this thing without rose-colored glasses, see exactly what's going on, and just try to move forward. But at the same time, he's a kid, and he's a kid. We're just parents. We're trying to figure it out like everybody else. And the only way to do it is to do it and go through it.
I have 13-year-old twins, and I did not go back to work after having them because I would have been essentially working to put them in daycare. So I ended up staying home with them, and Shelby is 14 months younger. And when Shelby was born, and the kids got older, we decided to homeschool the twins because we could not risk sending them to preschool and bringing home all the germs with Shelby. So at that point, the division of labor came like pretty easily. My husband worked, I took care of the kids. I think the biggest thing is to know your role and to know your strength. I am really good at GSD, getting stuff done. I can remember things that doctors don't remember that they have told us. But just knowing your strengths. My husband is super kind and calm, and I'm like, how can you be calm right now? We have to do this, this, and this. You got to change your G tube, and like, where is the thing? And you have to know each other's strengths. And the division of labor is hard, and there is a lot of resentment with it, but you have to, again, go back to knowing who you are, and that like, this is my gift and this is okay. And I'm going to use that. One of the other things that I haven't mastered yet is just the whole, like, you have all this crazy stuff happen, and like, you can't really have a fight. Like, you can be mad about other things, but it's like, then something crazy will happen. It's like, I want to still be mad at you about the toothpaste from the squeezing from the middle thing, but like, you cannot hold on to that petty stuff, but it does build up. But it's like, you find a way to rally and to just be together. And we can look back and be like, wow, we have done this. Like, we've done things that nobody else, you have done things that nobody else ever thought that was possible. And you can look at your partner and say, yeah, just know what you've been through together.
Oh, sure.
Nicole, you just made me think of one other thing. I think humor helps so much. I think so much of what we see day in and day out can just be like negative or doctor's appointments and just operational. And I think finding like having some humor. I think Dan and I have had to have some like dark humor, I think too. Like I mean, if you can make light of a hospitalization or, Henry, for example, was admitted to the ED overnight a few weeks ago after I came back from a trip with my best friend from college. And the running joke was, Henry was mad that I was gone. And Dan, like, you couldn't step in and do as good of a job as mom did. Like, I mean, we're making that joke in the children's emergency room, and the doctors are like, what is wrong with these people? But I think just finding like some sort of humor and like lightness to lighten the mood sometimes I think can just help, and helps with the like, oh, I was so angry at you for like you saying something so stupid, but like now we have to do an emergency trach change. So like I got to rely on you. Like I just have to figure out how to get over it.
We have a couple minutes left, and we kind of answered the first two questions throughout this. But just closing, what's one piece of advice you'd give to families who are just beginning their Perkins journey, or if they're not enrolled in Perkins yet, their journey with their family?
Okay. I would say just be open-minded. I think being open-minded, showing up and putting in the effort, I think will just pay dividends. And, even though the future may seem daunting, right? And Henry's only 4.5. So like his future still seems daunting. And sometimes I find myself spiraling, but just like have to bring it back to the here and now. I think just focusing on that, being open-minded, trying to build your network and find your people and find the support. And I think just knowing that, I mean, as Nicole said, like everyone in this room is dealing with something that you probably never imagined you would. And all you really can do is play the cards you're dealt and keep moving forward.
Again, can't agree more. I think this shows right here 3 different families, and all of our stories are very similar. You know what I mean? We all feel the same way. And just jumping right in, show up to those picnics, come to these conferences, get involved, because Perkins won't leave you alone if you don't leave them alone. I'm knocking at the door, Emily. So I mean, just get yourself involved and you'll always have a resource. And now Perkins feels like home to us. We're 2 years out and we're here. So we'll always show up.
Yeah, the same. Just keep showing up. Do all the things. If a thing presents itself, do the thing. Make the connection. It's gonna be tough for your social anxiety, but it'll be worth it. If I could give myself advice back then, I would say to just be patient and be present, because any milestone that you get is going to be worth the entire thing. A smile, a wave, whatever. It's all going to be worth it in the end. I said the bad only makes the good more meaningful.
And CJ took what I was going to say, which is just say there are good moments. They can be really hard to see at times, but there are good moments, and just savor them and share them with people, with extended family. I would tell them to the lady at Target when we would go in, because she would recognize us, and because there's nothing better than watching your kid smile, and other people won't understand how sweet that is, but I would just savor those moments.
Thank you, guys. Okay. Yeah, if you want to ask that question.
I got it. Okay, perfect. Sorry. Okay. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences. They're very valuable and enriching. As a special education teacher, I would like to ask you, how have you coped with society's prejudices or stereotypes? What would you say to professionals in training regarding interdisciplinary work?
Can you repeat the question, please?
As a special education teacher, I would like to ask you, how have you coped with society's prejudices or stereotypes? What would you say to professionals in training regarding interdisciplinary work?
So for me, so society's pressures and stuff. So we're like a church family. We go to church and it can be really intimidating. I always try to start from the point of similarity. Like, hey, like Shelby likes ice cream. Do you like ice cream too? And creating that common bond, and that can kind of it can put people at ease. It can break down those stereotypes that, oh, like your kid can't like a bunny because, you know, he uses an eye gaze tracker or something like that. Or yeah, things like that is starting from a place of commonality, and the shared human experience can do that. And yeah, like you go to Target and stuff, you bring your kid out, which can be really challenging, but having others on the outside see how your life can be fairly normal and typical can be one of those things.
Yeah, I would say the same thing, and it's part of the never stop doing the things thing. Um, the more you do stuff, the more normal it becomes. You know, going to Target is cool at some point. You know, in the beginning, it's like, oh my God, he's gonna lose it. But then it becomes normal. And, you know, we have this pho restaurant that we used to go to. Every time we would go in, the lady would say, Charlie, Charlie. And then she'd bring him over like cookies or something. It was like, cookies aren't on the menu. But for the prejudices, um, you know, at this point, you know, now that we brought him out and he's just become very normal, it's a them problem. It's really not an us problem. It's like, you know, he's just doing his thing. Who cares if he wants to hold this pot or pan for the entire time we're in the store? What's your problem with it? Um, because it's really none of your business at the end of the day. And people can look, it's just really a lack of understanding. So maybe there should be some sympathy there because of a lack of exposure. But you're doing you're doing everybody a service by bringing your kid out there in the first place, and giving them the exposure, giving your kid the exposure to normalcy, a normal environment, instead of, you know, hiding away. And then it becomes harder for you to have them out, and it becomes harder for them to be out. As for, you know, the interdisciplinary stuff, I think that a lot of educators do a great job with what they're doing. The only thing I would say is for them to push more, um, you know, community experience, you know, try to push connection more, because I think that's really the hardest part for parents, especially in the beginning, is um, is getting out there and connecting with people, because you feel so alone and it's so scary to do. But I think that should be pushed more, and, you know, encouraged to just go live your life, because the other stuff is hard, but that's even harder sometimes.
I would completely agree with that. Like I was saying to Megan earlier, I'm not trying to live in a world where I'm going to put my son in a world that needs to be built to make it comfortable for the world, make the world comfortable for my son. I don't want to limit him. And once he limits himself, then the box is really small. So we'll never limit him because he'll just keep going up from there. Charlie's first music festival was at 6 months old. So now he's 5 and goes every year and loves music and broadens his horizons every single day for those exact reasons. So limiting is a really huge thing for us, and we're never going to do that. Other than that,
I'd agree with all of that. I think I like what you said, that it's a them problem. Like I feel like I'm a very confident person. My husband is extremely confident. My 6.5-year-old understands that Henry's different and loves him for it, and is excited and proud to show him off to his friends. So I think, like, I don't know that exposure therapy is the right word, but we try and bring Henry I mean, we are a circus when we go out anywhere, right? Like, we have the 3 kids. If our dog's there, he's a nightmare too. Like, we're seen anywhere we go, but it's been very important to us. Again, going back to, you know, Henry's disability is part of him and part of our family, but not all of it. We just were not willing to sacrifice everything else going on in our lives just for comfort, or maybe even for like an illusion of comfort. So we bring Henry to every sports game that my older son plays in. We bring him, I think both of us went on Make-A-Wish trips recently. We've also traveled with him to go visit family, which like is brutal and I hate it and I'm anxious leading up to it and it's awful, but it is always worth it. So I think, there have been times where people have said rude things to us and like I assume good intent and that they just don't have the words to be able to ask. I think we've had a lot of questions from my older son's kids, which was something that, funny enough, I remember being worried about when my kids were younger and thinking like, how am I going to answer it if Liam's friend asks why Henry has a trach? And now it's like, oh, he has a trach because it helps him breathe clean air and his eyes are looking up. He has CVI. Like this is just who he is. And I think hearing Liam's friends who have been around for a few years explain it to new friends is also just so wonderful too. And it's not that everyone knows that Henry's different, but it's just normal to them that, oh, this is just Liam's brother. So I think also just knowing that like your kids are amazing and if someone else has a problem with them, like that's absolutely their problem and they can mind their own business and like that's none of our business. Yeah. I'm also not afraid to be mean, which like my husband and one of our nurses make fun of me. I'm like, I will clip ankles if they're not getting in, if they don't move out of the way for the wheelchair. Like I'm not afraid to do that.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for attending the 2026 Early Connections Conference. Action. Scan the QR code in the center of the screen for more sessions.